Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I am your host, Roman Zelichenko, and today we are on episode 73, and we're going all the way to Singapore. Well, virtually. I'm here in New York City, but our guest today is coming all the way from Singapore. Um, our guest today is Junxian Lee, who is the co-founder of Moovaz. And Moovaz is basically a relocation technology company that helps companies, individuals with their relocations, everything from kind of visa and immigration stuff to the bulk of the relocation process. It's interesting as an immigration lawyer, and I've talked about this many times on the show. As an immigration lawyer, I was always focused on the visa side of things, right? You get the visa processed, the person is good, and you don't think about what happens after. But again, I'll keep repeating this, but I think it's really important to say for our industry, so much of the immigration process is with the physical move of a person, their family, their goods, their dog, et cetera. And so I'm always really excited to hear about platforms and, of course, the founders and the teams behind them who are digitizing this whole effort. So I'm Roman Zelchenko, your host, former immigration lawyer myself, and now I'm the co-founder of Laborless, which is an immigration tech startup that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which brings you this show and is a digital marketing agency for our industry as well. So without further ado, Junxian, thank you so much for being here, and I'm really excited for our conversation. And I know it's late in Singapore, so again, thank you for staying up and hanging out to talk.
Hey, Ruben. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So right now it's 11 o'clock because we're recording this live. It's 11 a.m. in Eastern. It's 10 p.m. You said, right, in Singapore?
11 p.m.
It's 11 p.m. Oh man.
Yeah.
So we'll keep this brief so you can get some rest. So we were talking a little bit before we went live. You're based in Singapore right now, which is this small but mighty country, right? In Asia that is growing like crazy. But as you were saying before, Singapore as a nation is really only about 50 years old. It's a very new country.
Right.
So can you share a little bit about kind of your background and maybe your family's background, where you were from, like what was your start? Because obviously if we go back before 50 years, there was no Singapore as it is today. So it's really always interesting to see kind of the immigration story of folks who are in this industry. So yeah, what can you share about your family's kind of immigration story?
Right. Thanks, Roman. Yeah, I guess my family and I are of Chinese descent. If you look at like the Malay archipelago, yeah, we were formerly formerly a part of the Republic of Malaysia, and then Singapore basically gained independence at that time because the Chinese were the minority. So the majority race in Malaysia are Malays. So they tend to be like brown skin, and they speak Bahasa Melayu. So the Chinese, we were basically merchants that went there. So I guess like even till today, if you look at like Malaysian politics, it still favors maybe the Malays, right? So it's like public knowledge. So for Singapore specifically, the Chinese used to hang out in like a small island on the southern coast of Malaysia called Singapore. And yeah, and I think I'm not sure what the official story is, but we were basically kicked out of like Malaysia, and that's when our founding prime minister, I don't know if you've heard of Lee Kuan Yew, but yeah, he came about and then really got the leaders together, and against all odds, we have no resources, right? Created modern Singapore. So
Wow.
yeah. So I guess my family and my dad was from Malaysia, so most of my childhood actually was in Malaysia. I grew up in like plantations, so with like chickens and like stray dogs, and surrounded by rubber trees. So rubber tapping. This was before synthetic rubber was created, but yeah. So that's kind of like my childhood, and then in my early years, my family and I decided to then like permanently shift to Singapore. Yeah, and my siblings and I got educated through the Singaporean system. Our government made several very important strategic calls, and using English as a medium of language was one of the main ones. and that has kept us, I guess, globally competitive.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think maybe just one other thing about like growing up in Singapore, like we are multicultural. So in Singapore, you see like Indians, like Malays, Chinese. We have Europeans, we have Eurasians. So like kind of like Europeans and Asians coming together because we were colonized before, and it's very natural for this to happen because it was just how we grew up with other people who look different. Maybe in one very real example, and I've studied in the States, and yeah, and I guess that's why I've come to appreciate some things that I should not take for granted. Like if you go on a Sunday, right, and you can see your neighbor, one person coming out of a Muslim mosque, the other coming out of a Chinese temple, and I'm Christian, so coming off my church, and that's totally okay. It's same street, and we go for lunch together, right? So it may seem mundane, but yeah, like strangely, when I guess when I was like spending time overseas, yeah, I've grown to learn to not take this for granted.
Hmm. Yeah, because I guess in many other parts of the world, folks who are, different cultures or different faiths tend to be kind of in their own communities, which is great. But at the
Yeah,
same time, you don't have that access daily to different types of people and
yeah,
things like that.
yeah, exactly. And I guess like one thing, I'm not sure what foreigners think about like the Singaporean government system. It might be a command economy. It might be to a certain degree autocratic, but like our housing systems, for example, almost mandate that within, let's say, a level, right, there'll be a certain ratio of Chinese to Malays to Indians. So, my neighbors certainly have Indian altars and pray to Indian gods, right? And every day I would smell, like Malay curry from my
Mhm.
other neighbor. And so, like it's like totally okay because it's just the way we grew up.
It's interesting because that's one of the things I really love about growing up in New York City, especially I'm from Queens, and Queens is a very, very multicultural area. It
Yeah.
still tends to be somewhat neighborhood based. So, you have little pockets of neighborhoods where maybe a lot of folks are from Central America, and then other people are from South Asia, and then other people are from Eastern Europe and whatever. But it's very, very close together. So in the main streets and the train stations and the restaurants, you have a mix of people, and yeah, I love that. In my building for sure, I walk in, and one of the things I love about living in a building is you kind of never know what kind of food you're going to smell every day you come home from work or something, and that's in
Yeah.
the best possible way. It gets you hungry. So that's really cool. And so, what was it like, kind of growing up? When did you move? How old were you when your family moved to Singapore?
So like permanently when I was probably about 6.
Okay.
Yeah, but Singapore and Malaysia ain't that far away. So if you drive, right, like I don't know, from my hometown in Malaysia to maybe my home in Singapore, it's maybe a 2.5 hour drive.
Oh wow.
So we during the weekends we commute because like
Okay.
half of my family is still in Malaysia, but the other half is in Singapore.
It's incredible. And is it difficult to cross the border, or it's fairly easy?
It's really easy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because like many people who live, at least in the US, on the Mexican US border or the Canadian US border, for many of them, they work or see family or friends across borders too. And sometimes it's more difficult, sometimes it's easier. But yeah, it's, in Europe, if you're in the Schengen zone, there's very often not even a check. You just enter another country.
right.
Um, so that's really cool. And what was it like? I mean, you'd mentioned to me that really Singapore as an economy has really exploded over the past 50 years. And we all know that it's one of the most powerful passports in the world, and
Yeah.
many countries have their headquarters, or at least their regional headquarters, in Singapore, and et cetera. What was it like to kind of, I don't know, what did you see as that transition? How did that, how was it growing up there for you during this
Mm.
period of kind of upward transition?
So I've actually seen. I don't know. Like, it's a good question. I'm just thinking, kind of like reflecting. Like, we actually saw different phases. So Singapore's population, it's only about 5 million, but we used to be 2 million, right? And then 3 million, and so population growth was a very, I guess, like key and strategic driver of our economy, right? That's how you increase productivity, right, or production, right? Just increase the number of humans, right? So that was like the initial push. I'll say the earlier years, we saw a lot of Caucasians actually. coming. So a lot of British, a lot of French, to a certain extent, like American companies as well, coming to our area and setting up regional headquarters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So if you look at like, I guess like the neighborhood composition, there was like that initial phase whereby there were a lot of foreign talent coming in, bringing bringing like technology, bringing like best practices, and we were just a swamp, right? So that was like the initial phase, and then like I think maybe maybe 10 years ago, we started seeing people from South Asia coming in, and that's because Singapore started becoming, I guess, like rich, right? And therefore, like the services market and the construction market started booming, and therefore we had like Chinese people from mainland China and like Indians from India coming in to fill the services sector. Yeah, but these I guess like this group of people, they were doing like the blue collar work, right? So the impression we had, I guess Singaporeans had, of like maybe Caucasians in the beginning, they're like the colonial masters,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they tend to hang out somewhere, they drink wine, So that's kind of like the impression I have of my childhood. And then and then I guess that once again, like we got a little bit wealthy, and then other Asians started coming in, right? And then they were the blue collar workers. So that dynamic changed. And then maybe like more recently, like Asians, specifically Chinese, started becoming rich, right? And then that whole perception changed again, right? So it's kind of like, maybe like 15 years ago, if you walk on the street and you see maybe someone from mainland China, right? You might not be able to tell because I look extremely Chinese, but maybe like to the Chinese, we can kind of tell like the differences, right? So you would think that, hey, that guy probably works in a canteen, right? But if you fast forward to today and you see like a Chinese walking in the street, you think, hey, that guy's probably rich, right? So
Wow.
yeah, so it's quite interesting to see like these like waves, but I think the main thing that maybe like the main learning, especially as a Singaporean, is like how it's not about people, it's not about races anymore. Like it's about individuals. Yeah, so really like there's very little racial lens because we used kind of like the guys up tops used to be Caucasian, right? But the guys up tops now are like Chinese. So that we just don't take these things for granted anymore, right? Like there's no fixed race, there's no like set bias, right, against the race that we are looking at. And I think I do believe that's the beauty of global mobility.
Yeah, it's incredible. And especially because it's so quick, that these changes, like you said, are so rapid within your lifetime, and even within a relatively short period of your lifetime, your surroundings force you to change your biases. We all have we're humans. Like we see something, we make an assumption, and then we push that assumption onto other people. It's just
Right.
it's natural, and it's really hard to get away from that. But it's probably easier, maybe in a way, if you see it changing in front of your eyes constantly, which
Yeah.
you're right is really cool. I mean, once you see that happen, my hope would be that people are like, well, there's no better or worse people or race or nation. It's just,
Mhm.
and which is really, yeah, it's really wonderful. I mean, not that this show is about that, but as you may know, I think in America, especially right now, there's just been such a big discussion around racial disparity and people learning or unlearning things that they've sort of been associated with. But it's harder in a big country because unless you're in a city like New York or San Francisco where you see this happening, you live in a place that you don't see many people as easily from other parts of the world, and so those changes are maybe slower. So yeah, it's really cool to see that difference. So you studied in Singapore. I know that you got your MBA as well, from Fudan University. I just I
Right.
saw that from your LinkedIn. Was that based in China? So you went to China to study, or is that in Singapore? They
It's
have
in
the
Shanghai.
campus. Okay, right.
Yeah. So I've actually also studied in Boston. I did like a Master of Economics and Finance in Boston. And
Hmm.
then I went to do my MBA in China.
Okay.
Uh, During my undergraduate days, I did an exchange in Vienna. So yeah, just kind of like, trying to get
Wow.
the feels, right? Of like, what is like European education? How do the guys on the streets talk, right? What do they
Yeah.
care about? Yeah, the same thing about like maybe like in America, and same thing, and then in China. So yeah, and then getting that lens, right, to really kind of like maybe understand what is and what's not.
Did you find a major difference? I mean, you studied I studied economics in undergraduate, and then I went to law school, of course. But then did you find a difference in the way that you studied in
Mm,
in Boston versus in China?
yeah.
Like, were there differences there that were apparent to you?
Certainly. So maybe in Harvard, right? So we study Keynesian economics, right? So I mean, I'm thinking how sensitive this is, but like, okay, but regardless, right? So my professor was saying like, hey, like this is like Keynesian economics. So most societies kind of we abide by or prescribe to it, right? But not the Chinese, right? Because they are like command economy. Okay, and then
Interesting.
I go to China, and we are studying the same Keynesian economics, right? And their view is like, hey, this is Keynesian economics, right? And this is like maybe the parts that works really well, and it explains a lot, but these are the parts that maybe we feel that we can maybe like value add or tweak specific to our culture, right, and our society and our belief systems.
Hmm.
So like it's interesting because it's actually the same coin, but you see both sides of it, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, it's really the same coin, right? It's Keynesian economics that doesn't change. Yeah, but just different interpretations of it.
And
Yeah,
it's also really cool that you were saying, the idea is, well, let's fit this economic model or the way that our society works into our culture,
yeah.
instead of forcing the culture to change around some prescribed economic norms, which I think is really cool. I mean, yeah, I think it's great to have culture have such have such importance, because part of, and this is again a totally different discussion, but I think sometimes, especially in America, it feels, and I grew up here, right? So substantively, I don't know much more, but it does feel very often that the way our economy, uh, the direction our economy goes, forces our society to shift, and like I think there's really there's beauty in that, because that means that there's going to be no stop to economic growth, and not even growth in the numbers wise, but like exploration, creativity. Like, I'm not going to not create a company because I'm afraid of how it will culturally impact. It's like, I'll create it. If people go to it, great. If people don't go to it because our culture is too strong, then the company is not going to work. I think that's really so, but I see the benefit to both sides. It's really interesting. And is there a reason that you went into, I mean, again, you studied economics and finance in America, then you got your MBA. Is there a reason that you were going in this sort of like finance business direction? I mean, you grew up, you said, on a plantation, you were making rubber. I mean, rubber, if you were starting a rubber company, I would say this is perfectly aligned with what you grew up knowing and seeing. So like,
Right.
what was there about these, about this profession or about this industry, the financial and finance and business? What about that was interesting to you?
Uh, Honestly, like I think like it picked me, right? I picked it. Yeah. So as a socially responsible son, to like Asian parents, I'm not sure if you watch Jimmy Chen, but like yeah, it's accurate to a good degree,
Yeah.
right? Right. So yeah. So I mean the key driver of the economy was. I mean, there were a lot of businesses in Singapore, right? So I have a general degree, and then I ended up specializing in finance. So yeah, it's basically where the jobs were. And if you graduate and if you become a banker, become a doctor, become a lawyer, then you are like a filial son. So it's a little bit of societal expectation.
Hmm.
But it's also because I guess I would say that maybe my parents, my family, we were from humble, we're from fairly humble backgrounds. So understandably that putting food on the table and being in a good profession was deemed as socially responsible, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Times have since changed, but yeah, I do suspect that maybe for me, that I just kind of like didn't think too much about it, right? Just kind of like stay the course, study hard. These are kind of like the good causes. These are the good jobs.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I graduated, and then actually after working in a financial institution, I chose to work in a non-profit organization because do something is all about money, do something is not about money, and it's like A/B testing, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically, I as an individual must lie somewhere in between, right? So the question
Right.
is is like where? Is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? Yeah, because I think I was given a good education. Pretty confident that I can do most jobs, so I can pick it up, right? But then the question beckons, if you can do everything, what will you do? And there's that, that paradox of choice, right? Whereby that paralyzes you sometimes.
Mhm.
So yeah, I was just trying to figure myself out.
Yeah. So I really I want to dive into what was that first job that you got out of school. Before we do that, for folks who are watching, first of all, thank you for being here. Second of all, drop a comment, tell us who you are, maybe where you are in the world, perhaps what you do. Drop a comment. I love to have these kind of interactions with folks or live. So if you have any questions, obviously, for Junxian or myself, please drop them in the comments as well. And then if you're enjoying this, give it a like or a thumbs up wherever you're watching. So right, you studied, you got your master's of finance and economics here. You went to get your MBA, and then afterwards, I guess, was that all kind of your school to school to school, or did you take breaks in between? I'm just sort of trying to understand the timeline of
Yeah.
your professional career in the beginning there.
Right. So I graduated with like a general degree in business, like with finance skills, right? So I graduated. I did marketing for a while, so like a bit of a jack of all trades. So I did marketing with the university. Oh, I graduated into the great financial crisis, by the way.
Mm.
So that's like 2008. Not a good time for finance, I would say. Yeah. And then worked in a financial institution. Did front office work. Then went to do nonprofit work. It was a nonprofit organization based out of BC. But I was working in the regional branch in Singapore. But involved a lot of travel. So taking a lot of best practices from like associations and education institutions in America, and trying to spread that, I guess, the sophistication into Southeast Asia, right? So yeah, and then I went to study primarily because I think I was still trying to figure things out. Yeah, I could do the work, but something didn't click. It clicked in China, right? I saw technology like really booming, right? So and this was technically like maybe an unsophisticated country, right? At that time, this was just 10 years ago. And then I can give you an example of what happened, and this like blew my mind. So like my classmates in China were kind of like withdrawing all their money from their bank and putting it into WeChat, right? Which to me is preposterous, right? It's like asking like maybe Roman like like draw all your money out of like Chase, right, and put it into WhatsApp.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it doesn't feel natural. So, but lo and behold, an entire country doing that, and I think that really like shook me. And maybe it alerted me to something fundamental that was happening. Right, people trust and place maybe a higher degree of moral responsibility on the large tech companies than they do on the government. Right, I'm Chinese, right? Where I put my money is where I put my allegiance, right? So it's my comfort, and it's my foundation, right? So yeah, but lo and behold, they are placed in the technology company, right? That I don't know. I'm not sure about you, but maybe some Americans might hold like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk to a higher degree of moral responsibility than they do like Donald Trump. Right. So, and this could not be, coming from Singapore, this is very weird to see because we really trust our government, right? Especially in Asia, right? We have like countries like Vietnam, communist, right? So it's kind of like my context, right? So that was like very, very like surprising to see, and I think maybe that just announced that like technology has arrived, right? And it will never go back. Yeah. So after my MBA, I came back to Singapore, and I became a kind of applied for the only job I could. I became a venture capitalist. Yeah, it's kind of like where finance meets like tech, right? Yeah. Yeah, and I was a VC with actually an organization that's listed in the New York Stock Exchange.
Okay.
It's C Group.
Yes.
Yes. So that kickstarted like I guess my journey and understanding into technology.
So this is C Group, right? C Group Ventures.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about what that was like? And I'm almost also curious about it because I came, from a kind of an economics and finance background, went into the legal space, and then just started to learn about technology when I became a lawyer. More about the sort of the VC world and the startup world. Um, what was it like for you to get into that space, and sort of what are some of the things that you maybe took away from it, because we'll get to Moovaz really soon. But obviously, you guys, you've raised some funding, but so that means you've been on both sides now. So
Right.
what were some of the things that you were learning as you went into this world that combined economics with kind of the growing technology sector?
Right. Uh, I think fundamentally, yeah, being able to see both sides of the coin and being able to understand what value creation means, to both parties, right? So you can structure something that's win-win, right? Like everyone wins. So finding that balance, I think, is key. When for us, fundraising is like finding a partner, right? So if the value proposition makes sense to both sides, then a deal can be done. Yeah. So I think starting out from venture capital helped me really gave me like a fairly good handle on the commercial value of technology,
Hmm.
right? And there is a science behind it, right? It can be calculated, but it is fairly specific to high growth technology companies, lah, right? This might not hold water for like Walgreens, right? You can't use that model. So yeah, so I think mathematically understanding what that equation looks like for it to make sense to a venture
Mhm.
capitalist that has a 10-year fund life, right? And then understanding at what rate of growth does the accompanying startup have to grow at, right? So that this model can make sense to all parties, was important. Yeah, so I think yeah, it really helps to be able to understand like the math on both sides.
And I also feel like, and maybe this is not true, but I think about it from the perspective of a startup founder, having a conversation with venture capitalists and with some VC firms. If they don't intrinsically know the motivations of a VC firm, or like how they view growth or success for them, I feel like it's harder to pitch your company. It's easier to sit down and say, listen, I know what you need. I've been on your side. So here's how what we have as a company fits what you need, But then
Mhm.
to your point, it's a partnership. So you also want to say, well, what kind of VC firm are you? What are your
Exactly.
terms? What are you going to give me? Is it just money, or is there a network or a mentorship or a specialization?
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot to be unpacked there. So it sounds like having that experience for you is really helpful eventually. Because I know that after that, I guess, and again, I'm sort of basing this off of your LinkedIn profile, but then you actually went to go on and co-found a technology company, right?
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it looks like it's called Shield. Initially,
Yeah.
it was called Cash Shield. So
Yeah.
this sounds like a perfect culmination of your life in technology and in finance and in venture. What motivated you to start that company and go from being a quote unquote, as you said, maybe socially responsible, child of an immigrant that has a good predictable job, to now doing one of the hardest things imaginable, which is starting a company. So like, what motivated you to do that first time?
So I do believe that, and this is just as an individual, like there's always gonna be an entrepreneur in me. During my undergraduate days, like even till today, like my very first business was actually to open like a cafe. So
Wow.
yeah, so my partner and I actually till today we still have like a small chain of cafes. So I guess entrepreneurship or yeah has always kind of like been in me. Just trying to figure out risk versus reward, right? But
Hmm.
I do believe that I made some silly decisions when I was younger, right? Maybe like too much testosterone, or I'm not sure, but yeah, I wouldn't make the same decision now. But I'm thankful that most of them worked out. Yeah, but basically, I do believe that there's always kind of like been an entrepreneur in me. So um, maybe as an individual, I think the earlier years were a little bit of a struggle because I'm inherently a jack of all trades, and I do believe I am more useful as a strategic thinker. That's
Hmm.
more broad based, right? A bit more macro, a bit more general. But as a young professional, you are kind of like required to really just grind through things. You don't go to the strategy department immediately, right? You kind of like you kind of like work your way into that role. right? And maybe when you're 30, you've earned your stripes, then here's a strategic role. So yeah, I think the earlier years were awkward for me, but I did my best to kind of do the job. And and then I think when I maybe hit 30, with enough savings, with enough like confidence, I came out to kind of like be a startup entrepreneur.
Hmm.
So yeah, I
Wow.
think that's kind of like the dynamics that was like going on.
How old were you? Just curious when you started that first business, this like cafe. I mean, that sounds like not an easy business to get into,
Right?
because you
Yeah.
have real estate, you have a supply chain of things, you got to buy cups, and I don't know how did, that's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah. So in Singapore, I was like 20. Oh, wait, let me 23 or 24. In
Hmm.
Singapore, we serve the army. It's mandatory. We do have a conscript army, so we tend to be 2 years behind, like maybe my American like classmates. So yeah, so probably when I'm 23 or 24, we go to the army typically when we are 17 to
Hmm.
18, and then 19 we enter university.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. Do you think, out of curiosity, do you think the fact that you had the experience of building a cafe, did that give you more confidence to try to build your first, like, let's just call it more high risk perhaps? Although I think probably cafe potentially is more high
It's
risk because you
higher
have
risk.
to, right?
Exactly.
Because you got to invest in all this stuff. But do you think there was some, was there some overlap of skills or lessons or things from there to when you first started building sort of more tech based companies?
Yeah, and honestly, like I do feel that the biggest maybe like development I got through the experience was, so we have we've opened many cafes and we've closed many cafes,
Hmm.
right? And some were more painful than the other. So yeah, I remember like there was this like we had like a Japanese restaurant, and some of my colleagues some of my colleagues, actually my classmates from before, they would
Wow.
know. Yeah, like it was like hemorrhaging money, right? And that was the money anxiety was real, right? So we fell into like a very very low state and really had to learn how to kind of like drag yourself out of that, right? So that builds character, right? On hindsight, it's easy to say, but I do think that that was kind of like one of the main things, right? Whereby I do understand what will break me, and I'm very, very sure what wouldn't, right? And that brings to me a certain degree of peace in my everyday work, right?
Hmm.
I'm okay if it doesn't work out, but I will always kind of like put my best foot forward. So yeah, so understanding the things that are within your control and you should be responsible for in terms of outcomes, and the things that are not, right?
So can you,
So
oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I do think that was like the biggest takeaway for like maybe like a traditional business, right? I can only share that the P&L is entirely different
Right.
from like a tech company, but yeah. But subsequently, when I guess like started evaluating tech companies, having run a cafe before, it was very apparent how different like the projections are,
Yeah.
just fundamentally, right? Like you're talking about like costings, right? Like even was from like let's say a cafe, right, which is like profit driven, right? From like maybe a venture backable like startup that is growth
Mhm.
driven. Like why, right? What's the difference, and where is value created? How is value like calculated? So it gave me like an additional benefit of being able to compare the differences in business model, and why it's different.
Can you talk just very briefly about Shield? Because it looks like
Yeah.
you were going, in TechCrunch, you raised a bunch of funding, et cetera. Um, what was the sort of the premise maybe behind the company, and how did you come to launch it?
So like the company was actually first launched by my friend. I think yeah, we went to the same like secondary school.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So yeah, so actually like what happened was that he had already started this idea, and he was trying to kind of like launch it, but it was probably it was doing very moderate success, right? Let's call it, for a long time, and then and we were always chatting, and I was sharing with him like maybe like what we were doing, and at that time I was operating Shopee. So under C Group, there's a very large e-commerce company called Shopee, right? So
Hmm.
a bunch of our guys and I, we were in charge of like launching the entire project. right?
Wow.
So yeah, so that was really good experience because like I just learned from really really good people, very good growth centric people, right? But okay, so yeah, so I was sharing this experience with him, and my co-founder, he was more like from a more traditional business background, right? And so one day he finally decided, right, that hey, like let's change this, right? Because he wasn't sure where this was going, and therefore like the previous company was called Cash Run, and then we took like a product that we knew had the security product basically that we knew had legs, right? And formed like a new business model,
Wow.
and then like started launching that into the global markets, and fundraising based on that. So yeah, my job was like my partner was like he was like more of a CEO CPO kind of person, and I was more of a CFO COO kind of
Mhm.
person. Yeah, so yeah, and we I guess like interesting story regarding Shield. Okay, so Shield's a very it's a very difficult name to SEO for, right? If you Google
Right.
Shield, the Avengers is gonna come up. But anyway, like, but regardless, right? We are B2B, so that's of like maybe a lower degree of importance. But uh, yeah, we were. I think maybe just two parts. Like the first thing is like product. We were finance people. Most of the solutions in the market, and we did not appreciate this in the beginning. Like they were built by engineers, right? So like let's write rules to really like weed out fraud, right? So hey, like if Roman's IP address using from the credit card he's swiping is like in America, like now, and then like 1 hour later, they see the same credit card being swiped in Singapore, something's wrong, right? So
Mhm.
that's like a rule. So like most of like I guess the security systems were created based on rules, right? Yeah, but for us, like we're finance people. Risk is return, right? Risk is not something you minimize. Risk is
Mm.
something you optimize, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, like if you tell me that I can take like venture capital, right? It's high risk, high return, right? It can work. So
Mhm.
yeah, but it doesn't even know that these are the ratios, right, involved. So yeah, so the shield algorithm was actually written with finance as the background, right? And because that was like the fundamental of it, everything else was different, right? The
Mm.
algorithms were like high frequency trading, like modules. It's not about value investing, right? It's not about historicals. It's about what was the trade that happened 2 seconds ago and what were the volumes.
Mm.
And that should predict the next second. So yeah, we were a security system that did not require historical data
Hmm.
because the algorithms were written with finance in mind and risk
Wow.
optimization. So I mean, we didn't know, but because it was just our background and that's just naturally how we wrote it. Yeah, but lo and behold, no one in the world saw like security that way. Alibaba became a client. In America, we're working with quite a few, of the larger like companies, including Razer.
Mhm.
Like in Europe, we're working with some of the telcos like T-Mobile and Vodafone, and
Wow.
yeah, so that was like exciting. Yeah, so that taught us a lesson about product, right? Like that each one of us is unique, right? But we to embrace your uniqueness and let that manifest in terms of a product. You never know, right? But once again, right, you should let the product and your business be the best representation of yourself, right? And for me, that worked out okay.
Wow, that's such an interesting lesson. It also goes to show that you shouldn't take for granted the knowledge that you have and assume that everyone already knows it or that other, tools or solutions are built with that in mind. There's always the first. It doesn't mean that you created this idea or this concept. It just means that you took your idea and concept, which had a finance background, and turned it into a technology product, which at the time, obviously, that just sort of didn't exist from that perspective, which is it's really cool. I think it's also a nice reminder from an innovation standpoint that innovation is never going to be 100% new. It's going to be
Yeah.
maybe 15% new, and the other 85% is based on some culmination of existing information that you put together in a maybe different or unique kind of way. Um, so you were there until 2018. Does the company still around at this point?
The company is doing really well. In
Nice.
fact, so yeah, it's a Maybe it's a good segue into Moovaz. Like, it was
Yeah.
actually like commercially a bad decision to step down from a CFO role of like a very well and decently valued company. So I mean, our latest round, we're invested by Temasek. Temasek is like the sovereign wealth fund of Singapore.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's in a good place. Yeah,
That's
but
awesome.
I guess like I think maybe two things. Like inherently, I do believe I am a 0 to 1 guy. I'm the most useful in problem solving and really like building things up, right? I do believe that that's maybe the core value I can bring to the people around me and the society I serve. So yeah, like with that in mind, like a bunch of guys actually, like my classmates, they were actually like subcontractors for a moving company, and they were doing it for about 5 years. So these are my classmates, right? Like and uh, they were just thinking like, hey, like why isn't there any technology in moving where there's in Singapore, we have the usual apps and we have the iPhone and all that, right? So everywhere else there's technology, but why is like this industry like lagging, right? So we had conversations about what is the opportunity, right? There's a gap, yes, but is that gap an opportunity, right? Or that gap is just like a problem that cannot be solved with technology. So yeah, we went about sizing the market, trying to understand like for example, if you look at real tech's representation in maybe the entire relocation market is only 0.1%, which is it cannot be, right? It's only one of two conclusions you can draw from that. Number one, there's no role for technology to play,
Hmm.
which cannot be, right? Technology has a role to play in everything now. Or number two, right, whatever manifestation of technology that exists cannot correctly or sufficiently address the needs of the market, right? So yeah, so if you're at 0.1, bring it to 10%. So if you look at ride hailing is 33%. If you look in America, e-commerce, right, it's probably about 17% of retail. So yeah, there is a 100x growth opportunity, right? Bringing 0.1% to 10% is 100x, but there definitely isn't a 100x growth for ride hailing, or 2x growth at most for ride hailing, right? So to a VC, that's exciting, right? But that's also risky, but that's also exciting.
What about the industry? So, and I guess I'm going to ask you: did you have personal experience moving? Maybe for I get you obviously moved first as a student, so you relocated to the U.S. for I guess what 2 years or so on a student visa, and then you worked I guess in the U.S. So you probably had some sort of a work visa or something like that when you were at the nonprofit. So you went through the relocation process there. You went to China, which I guess is a bit closer, but nevertheless, it's a move. You're in a different country, etc. Did you ever also have to relocate for work? Maybe with the VC firm, did you have to do any assignments or projects internationally where they sent you on a professional move?
Uh, so I was actually just chatting with like the guys earlier about this. Like, um, okay, I'm gonna deliver this in a measured way. But like, like maybe like if you look at when I was doing e-commerce at C Group, right? In a year, maybe like out of 12 months, 9 months I'm not in Singapore, right?
Wow.
But I feel like visa policies are actually probably in a little bit of an unstable state, right? So in certain countries, right, where maybe work visas were a little bit more forthcoming to apply for, I did have a work visa. But anyways, I'm like 2 weeks in this country, 2 weeks in the next country, 2 weeks in the next country. So, maybe it's a tourist visa. I don't know, right? In some countries, tourist visas like 30 days. In some countries, it's 90 days. And, like, so but I am traveling for work. So yeah, I do think that it's going to come to like a certain confluence, right? Whereby like we need to rethink the way we look at short-term visa versus long-term visa, right? Yeah, it's not categorized correctly. I feel in today's in a modern age of business, especially with digital nomads, especially with like like remote working, right? It's not so relevant anymore.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I guess like in some countries I did have a work visa. In some countries I technically did not require a work visa because I did
Hmm.
not have to stay there permanently for an extended period.
Hmm.
Right, I can be a little bit more nomadic about the way we look at it. And
Yeah, I
since
mean,
right?
And let's be honest, I mean, how many people work as digital nomads around the world? They open up their laptop, they go to a cafe, and they run their marketing agency, their YouTube channel,
Exactly.
their Instagram account, whatever it might be, and they're monetizing. And
Exactly.
and look, it's one of those things where technology, consumer technology, has far outpaced the regulations and laws, especially internationally. And I think that's normal. It's
Mm.
really hard to change a law. It's very easy to launch an app, comparatively speaking. And so it certainly makes sense. Obviously, as a lawyer, what our job is to inform our clients or the world, the industry more generally. Here's what you should or shouldn't do. Here's how you can maybe get away with this, or here's like what you definitely should stay away from.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you traveled a lot for work. So when your friends that were subcontracting in the moving industry started talking about the lack of technology in this space, was
Mm.
there any part of you that was like, yeah, wait a minute, now that I recall all of the moves that I did as a student for work, etc., it could have been better, or was there no connection like that?
No, 100%. There was I totally related to it. So like I mean like just in China, right? Like maybe just even in China, like the student visa, like I had to go to the school, and then after going to school, like everything's in Chinese, right? So no, and I'm maybe like my first language is probably English, but I am fluent with Chinese, right? But business Chinese is different level, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so okay, so everything's in Chinese, and then like and there were no instructions, or maybe there were instructions, I couldn't find it. I'm not sure, but yeah, no, just like walking around campus asking random people like which building do I go to. So in China, I had to go to this building. I have to use their photographer, take this photo, and then like bring it to the next another building, another random building, and they issue you this little red book. So the little red book does exist, right? Very communistic, but okay. So take that little red book, go to like the police station down the street, and then like get this stamp. And if you get this stamp, they're gonna give you this sheet, and then take that sheet, go to like like 3 stations down, right? Like and go
Wow.
to the embassy and queue up. So yeah, I mean, like, I do think that there could be a better user experience. Like, I mean, I'm sure there are like 1,000 people exactly like me, right? So, yeah, like, the awkwardness in something so simple, it is just admin, right? It's just paperwork, so it doesn't have to be that way. And maybe like it could be digitalized.
Mhm.
Maybe it just has to be standardized, so everyone, as long as the instructions are clear, right?
Right.
So yeah, definitely like felt the awkwardness in like in multiple ways.
And so I guess this is a really good way to transition to Moovaz. So what does the company do? Tell me and everyone listening about the company.
Uh,
What does it do? What problem does it solve? And I guess for whom? Is it people? Is it individuals? Is it
mm,
companies?
yeah,
Or both, maybe?
yeah. It's for companies. So we are B2B2C. So Moovaz is a technology company, and we provide relocation management software basically for relocators and their families like globally. So we have a platform. So we do have like a partner platform, and we have like an end user platform. So platforms are equipped with like tooling that I guess like what we really want to do is like bring the joy out of moving, and in the process reduce uncertainty and stress rate. So we feel that with every move, actually, there's that sense of like adventure, right? But then it gets bogged down by all that friction, and suddenly you start thinking about, God, like how am I gonna like settle this thing, right? So and then that like that joy meter just like goes all the way down, right? So we really want to bring out that joy, so accentuate the joy and reduce the uncertainty and stress. We work with relocation service providers like visa and immigration service providers, moving companies, pet relocation companies, sometimes like cleaning companies, right? So as long as you're in the business of either servicing expats or like in the business of relocation, you're a partner like for us. We do three things. We provide leading software, so CRMs for our partners. We help them improve like customer satisfaction levels, and we help our partners increase revenues. We do have a fairly unique business approach to relocation. So it's not just innovation from a technical perspective. I think fundamentally it's rethinking, right? What does a Uber model for the entire relocation project look like, and how is commercial value created, right? So yeah, we do have a fairly unique approach to that. So yeah, we work with people like you, Roman, like labelers.
Do you work with companies in-house teams? Because many large organizations have in-house mobility immigration teams who almost function like their own little, RMC or what have you.
Yeah.
So do you also support them as your clients or as partners?
Mm. We do. In fact, like yeah, and so let's say like so one of our, like our people one of, maybe I won't call it clients, but people we work with like previously, like with their their employees or the corporate assignees, right? Like Accenture. So
Mhm.
the senior level guys would tend to have, like, they tend to have like assistants or a secretary, and it tends to be like the full service, right? Oh, in fact, like yeah, Danielle, my colleague, was just sharing that Serva and BGRS, they just merged.
Mhm.
Yeah. So interesting, right? And they are like the large RMCs, right? That service maybe the top guns, right?
Mhm.
But we feel there's everyone else. There's like the junior mid stuff, right? Junior mid stuff, and they are self-initiated. They're on a lump sum. They're on a 2-year local plus contract, right? So the HR departments work with us to recommend like our platforms, right? For the areas that they don't cover. So in-house mobility departments, for example, could help with like visa application, but everything else, you might have to manage on your own. So they work with us to kind of like to help that entire process for the employees.
So okay, so if I want to go through an example if I can, maybe for
Yeah.
myself and perhaps for others. So if I'm a so you have these clients that are maybe in-house mobility teams. Do you also have a network of partners who fulfill some of these services? So if I'm large corp XYZ based out of San Francisco, and
Yeah.
okay, fine, the senior level people, white glove service, everything's going to be done for them. But
Right.
the junior and sometimes even the entry level employees, relatively few years of working, who want to do a 6-year assignment somewhere for the fun of it. They're single, they want to live in Paris, whatever.
Yeah.
And so would it make sense for the in-house team to use Moovaz? And then if they do, okay, they have an immigration supplier on, a lawyer, a law firm or whatever on the ground. But then to your point, the person wants to move their dog and then they also want to find a home and all that. Do they do that all through your platform? And if so, like, do they find the providers or like, how does that, I mean, can you walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the short answer to that is yes. We are an amalgamator, but obviously we're a managed marketplace, right? So we have a concierge, and we have like a software to help with the relocation management process, right? So it's really at your fingertips. We have about maybe today 2,300 partners globally. But it's not enough because, like in America, for example, just certain states we have like maybe 3 to 5 partners, right? Yeah, and we do tend to work with like our more trust. We do have VIP partners, right? And whereby we realize the working relationship is good. So yeah, we do. SKUs wise, I think today, like I'm just checking with my colleagues, like probably 10,000 plus SKUs.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, but if you talk about maybe active partners, my guess is maybe like low hundreds.
Hmm. Hmm. So the idea would be it's like a full service. I go onto the platform and the different individual facets of moving, relocating, I can fulfill
Yeah.
through the platform. And then of course I'm assuming there's like tracking mechanism and dashboard, like something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's cool. And how do you think? I mean, you know, how do you think the landscape is changing with, as you were mentioning sort of briefly? Now there's digital nomads and there's
Mm.
a work from anywhere policy. Is that
Yeah.
something that you guys have been thinking about or are looking forward to, or is that now this sort of next step of mobility? And we don't know what that future is going to look like.
Yeah. So maybe like two parts. So uh, I think like migration has has existed since the dawn of mankind. So like people move seeking a better life, right? That will not change. So yeah. So yeah, like I don't know, like, but flows change, right? Where are you moving from? Where are you moving to, and why? Right? So I think what we're looking at is like maybe the pandemic is one reason why, right? A new reason why. So that affects the way people move. Um, like work from home, or like an embracement of kind of like remote working, right? That's gonna drive like movement in a different way. So yeah, yeah, it's not. I don't think this is a unique event, right? But it's an event nevertheless, right? So I think our maybe the team and I, our job is to figure out like, yeah, like how does this therefore change consumption habits, right? And how do we make sure that we can best serve needs? The needs are changing, but we are nimble, right? We are a startup, right? So if
Yeah.
anything we are good at, we are fast,
Yeah.
right? So figure things out. So yeah, and this is unlikely to be the last change. In fact, like I know the Ukraine war has resulted in like net migration westwards, Estonia, Lithuania, right? And and that's an event, right? So yeah, so maybe for us, we're not exactly strong in that side of the world, but that is an event. Closer to home, Sri Lanka currently has like a currency crisis, right? And they are experiencing like brain drain. So very good engineers like leaving the country because economically speaking, the opportunity is elsewhere, right? So identifying that and figuring out how do we wrap our service offerings around that market as an origin and whichever markets as a destination, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so it is a continuous process. I think maybe one other big shift that we've seen a little bit more pronounced would be HR policy changes.
Hmm.
Yeah, so if you look at maybe the large RMCs like Server and BGRS, they are specialized in servicing certain kinds of clients in a very white glove way, right? But then there's everyone else, and I think what's happening in the market is that group of everyone else is growing at a growing rate, right? So you're gonna need new solutions, right? Kind of like Airbnb, right? Nothing wrong with Hilton, right? It's just that there's a new market that's
Mhm.
like emerging and new needs. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we look at the market.
So it's like servicing the, let's just call them SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, from the relocation space is it's a growing segment. And it's not that you're taking away from the other pie. I think it sounds like the pie is just getting bigger.
Yeah, yeah. The needs are changing, and it might not even be an SMB. Some some MNCs, some large corporations don't really have an international assignment policy,
Mm.
right? Or and some small companies are extremely remote,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, so
True.
it's really needs basis, but I think ultimately is how do we create like product flows for this group of people, right? You can have like millionaires that honestly would rather stay in an Airbnb,
Right.
right? So yeah, I do think it's packed to like maybe like consumption habits and user flows.
That's really interesting. Um, how I was going to ask you, you guys, it was in the news, you raised a Series A
Mm,
around, I think, $7 million in April of 2020.
yeah,
So right as the pandemic really shut the world down,
yeah,
and kind of really put movement to a halt. Obviously, there were still people moving in many exceptions, and
yeah,
through that, remote work has changed the policies and brought about what is today. But I'm just
yeah,
curious from you as somebody who came from the VC world. I know that fundraising takes some time. It could take 1 month or 6 months, but there was a lead up to it, and it's like you close the round, you finally announce it, and then boom, the world shuts down. You as
yeah.
a leader, how did you navigate that? Like, and maybe how do you continue to navigate that now, because the world is open, but it's still kind of iffy.
Right. So communications with maybe we have a very very good Series A investor in Quest Ventures. Quest Ventures, they are operator led, so these are guys that they used to run their own startup, but now they're VCs, right? So I think there is maybe like alignment as kind of like startup founder to startup founder, right? That there are things that are external and there are things that are internal that you can control, right? So the deal went through, but my commitment to like our investors and our stakeholders, right, was that what I'm gonna do, right, is like the spending plan has to change, right? Because we're gonna need time for one, like the pandemic to stabilize, right? And two, for us to figure this out, right? I'm an entrepreneur. Like I would say that I'm optimistic, but I tend to look for the silver lining. But I demand of myself that I substantiate that optimism, right? The opposite of that would be just like I don't know what you call it, like confident ignorance is dangerous, right? So yeah, so um, the pandemic, if anything, is the great equalizer, right? In fact, it probably hits the large companies harder. So
Mhm.
things will change, right? Now, the added layer of complexity is COVID, right? And so yeah, and we are a startup, right? So my question is, like, given that like the entire boat has been rocked, right, and there are all these cracks that are like surfacing, where is the opportunity? What should I be building, right? So yeah, but it's going to take time to figure that out, and it takes time for like things to stabilize so that we know that this need is not like it's not a passing fad, right?
Mhm.
It's like the future. It's going to look like that, or some semblance of this. So yeah, I think with that confidence, yeah, we closed the round, and it did put a little bit of like a dampener on our initial growth plans. But hey, like I do believe we have a very very good team. We are still in the midst of like stabilizing and figuring out what like a very strong value proposition would look like,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, to like our partners. So yeah, so I think like maybe like I don't know. Are we still in the pandemic? I don't know what the technical like definition of it is anymore. It's an endemic, maybe. I don't know,
It's
but
a good question. I mean, it's a good question. There's obviously in-person events are coming back, offices are opening back up, but it will be interesting to see how, to your point, HR policies change because clearly, listen, I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and there were some large companies that are like, "We're everyone's coming back to the office. There's no remote work." Other
right,
companies said, "Well, we're bringing back people 2 to 3 days a week because we want to have in-person collaboration, but we're allowing people to work from home, let's say Monday, Friday, or whatever they want." And then other
right,
companies, as you mentioned, some of whom are startups, but famously now Airbnb just announced that they're letting everyone work remotely. Some other companies, big and small, are saying, "Hey, you go work wherever you want." I
right.
think the Airbnb policy was up to 90 days in any other
Yeah,
part of the world,
right,
and maybe that's just their control, to just not let people go wild and live at the top of the mountain for the next year and a half.
right,
But it still shows that there's going to be some shift, and right now it feels that some companies are defaulting to what they know because it's easier. They just want to get back to work, and other companies are taking this as an opportunity to put effort and energy into their policies. Um,
right,
so yeah, I mean, it's cool in a way. I mean, again, the pandemic, COVID has been off. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like this is just some business experience. This was people, many people died, got sick, lost loved ones, and so it's not to make light of this at all. But to your point, it's an event that happened, and society has to move forward. And how do we look at what we have in front of us and
yeah,
build companies and policies and things to account for that? So yeah, really interesting. And I think it's, it's cool to see you in terms of as a leader. What I took away from what you just shared was number one, the need of a really good partner.
yeah,
If it's an investor or if it's clients or, your partner companies, they have to, if they're on the platform, they have to feel confident that the platform is going to continue to exist, if not thrive.
right,
So the number one, it's connecting with or having the right people on your side. And then of course, number two, really great kind of open and honest communication with them to make sure that everyone's aligned and on the same page. And then I think number three, what I took away from you is, substantiating the dream scenario, right? Which I think is important because many people just have a vision and they put that vision out there, but they can't back it up with data, number one, or number two, they don't do what they need to do to make that vision sort of
right.
become a reality.
Actually, like just like an add-on, like the team and I have put together like 100-page human mobility report, and this was like for yeah, and yeah, so we put a lot of effort into it, but it does show right what has happened from the pandemic, right? Because if you look in Asia, like we do have previous pandemics. We have data from H1N1 in Hong Kong or closer to home in Asia. We had SARS, right? So what was the impact in the short term? What is the impact in a 5 year? Like like time frame, 10-year time frame. Yeah, so it helps us to maybe like use past data to better understand the current pandemic, right? And maybe like for a business, like try to make like an educated guess on what like for your own company the strategy might be for the next 2 years, right? Given this data. We're gonna be sharing the human mobility white paper
Nice.
with everyone. Yeah. So everyone with the data, you guys can figure out your strategy, right? Yeah. Maybe I think probably in a month.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for that. I'm looking forward to reading it. I wanted to bring up just a couple of comments. I know we're coming up on time here, but we just had one comment here from Arcit just saying inspiring and amazing so far. I've read Cities and Ambitions blog. Each city has a message if you live there long enough. And he said apparently you stayed in the U.S., China, and currently Singapore. So I think this was maybe more of a broader conversation, maybe to have offline at another time. But our car asks, I wonder what message Singapore carries, which is a very deep question, I think, about a place. But I love that question. So thank you, our car. Maybe you guys can connect, and chat about Singapore. And then we have Kerwin Guillermo. Thanks, Kerwin, for your comment. Says, thank you for the spotlight on both what's been and what's next. And he's saying, I look forward to connecting offline. So there you go. Another person to have a conversation with perhaps after this. So Junxian, I appreciate you. Of course, this has been such an interesting and insightful conversation, and I think your journey has been really cool. We don't have a lot of, as far as people I've spoken to on the show and otherwise, not too many people who get into this industry with prior VC background. But I think it's an important caveat because there is more outside capital coming into this industry because guess what? People are waking up to the fact that technology is starting to penetrate the immigration and global mobility space. There's a lot of opportunity and not all that much competition yet, right? There's not a lot of legacy. There's just a lot of nothing. And I think it's important to know what the motivations are of outside capital, and also important to understand the knowledge gap. Like if I'm pitching a VC, if I'm pitching them an immigration company, I have to paint a certain picture that they will understand, unless maybe they are immigration lawyers themselves, And so I think this balancing act is really interesting. So it's cool that you're sort of part of this industry and also have that background. I like to end with a sort of maybe lighter question because we've now had a whole hour long kind of this really great and deep discussion. Very often the folks who are on this show have lived in many parts of the world, especially for an extended period of time. So you lived in Boston. You've also, and DC, you lived in the US, you've lived in China, and you've traveled around the world. I always wonder which of these types of questions to ask, but I guess I love food. And so maybe my question that I should probably always lean on is, where do you remember having your most memorable meal? And by the way, that can be the side of a dirty road eating something off a truck, or it could be double Michelin star restaurant. But you've been all over the world. What's kind of the most memorable meal that comes to mind?
So it's actually in Singapore, and and it's so in Singapore we have it's a different conversation, but it's a long conversation. But Singapore we have like a hawker system,
The
so it's kind of
stalls,
like
right?
hawker stalls. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So actually there's no specific moment, but for Singaporeans we wrap our day around food. So let's say Roman and I, right, we're gonna hang, right? So maybe in America, it'll be like, hey, we're going to this event and we just eat whatever, right, around the area. But in Singapore, our life is wrapped around food. So it's like, hey, we're going to eat at this store and then we'll do whatever, right? So,
Ah,
yeah, so when I was, maybe like when I was traveling around, actually, and I'm pretty sure most Singaporeans are like me, we, in the back of our head, we really yearn to come back home to eat at that hawker store. And it's not because it's like really good, it's because it's like home. Yeah, so it'd be that specific store selling like, I don't know, man, like chicken rice that you just really want to go there to eat it. And it's very Singaporean because like, yeah, once again, our a lot of our personal lives are wrapped and our events are wrapped around food.
wow. I need to go to Singapore because that's how I wrap every day is centered around food
Food.
and so that's amazing. I think about some of these moments that I've had in my life. One of my most favorite was I was in South Korea at just walking around one night. I went to like a food court type of thing, and I ordered this soup. I didn't know what it was, and it was very red, like it was a deep red, meaning there was very, very hot peppers,
Spicy.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's very spicy. And so I started eating it, and it was absolutely delicious. And my spice tolerance is pretty good, but it was, I mean, visibly I was sweating and my face was hot, and I kept on walking. There was like a little water cooler, so I kept on walking and refilling a cup of water and drinking
Oh
it,
gosh.
going back to my table, eating the soup, and I was by myself. And I remember, I'll never forget the one of the women who worked there. Her English wasn't great, but she basically came up to me. She was like, you know, you don't look like you're okay. Do you want me to give you another type of soup? You know? And I'll never forget that moment, because my instinct was like, no, I'm going to finish this soup. I'm not going to back
Sweet to
down.
the end.
Yeah. So it was just, yeah, like I totally understand you. This concept of a very kind of homey, an environment that feels, the fact that she came up to me, it means that she noticed, she cared,
Right.
and I love that. Like that was more important to me than the soup itself. Obviously it's a different country, but I think that the concept or the context around eating is really important. So you're making me miss travel and miss like these kind of food stalls. So I hope to come to Singapore one day, and when I do, I will definitely ask you at least for some recommendations on where to go to eat.
Yes, please.
So this is great, Junxian. Thank you so much again. I know it's really late for you, so appreciate you staying up. I know. Hopefully you'll get some rest thinking about all this stuff, and thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to continue to watch the growth of Moovaz. People can, it's moovaz.com, moovaz.com, for folks to go check it out. And obviously folks should connect with you and on LinkedIn and elsewhere to keep in touch. And I'll have all that information in the description of this episode. So yeah, thank you again. I really appreciate it. This is really awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
What a great conversation. I miss travel. I'm hungry now. And I'm most importantly really excited for the future of this industry. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the comments. For those who are watching, I hope you picked something up and learned something here. And obviously, please connect with Junxian here on LinkedIn or wherever you're watching, and check out Moovaz. I'm excited, always excited to see. It's not that fundraising is the most important thing, but I think fundraising in this industry shows that outside people, not just us immigration mobility nerds, are seeing the value. And to me, that's super important. So till next week. Is next week? I don't think there's no episode next week or the week after, because I'm speaking at a couple of conferences. But I will be back in 3 weeks, again on Friday, with another guest. In the meantime, thank you all for your support, for watching. I hope this was interesting. Have a great weekend, and peace out.